It was Christmas on the island of Sodor. All the engines were working hard. Thomas and Toby were busy carrying people and parcels up and down the branch line. Everyone was happy. Only the coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, were complaining. "It's always the same before Christmas," they groaned. "We feel so full. We feel so full." "Oh, come on," said Thomas as he puffed out of the station. "Where's your festive spirit? Leave that to the others. All we get is hard work," said the coaches. "Cheer up," said Thomas. "Christmas Day is almost here." By the side of the track was a lonely little cottage with a familiar figure standing by the gate waving to them. "It's Mrs. Kindly," whistled Thomas. "Beep, beep! Happy Christmas!" However heavy the loads, Thomas always felt better for seeing Mrs. Kindly. "Christmas just wouldn't be Christmas without Mrs. Kindly," he said, and puffed thoughtfully on. When work was over, Thomas went to see the other engines. It was a scene of great celebration. Their coats had been polished, and they felt very proud of themselves. "Huh," said Gordon, "just look at us. Your driver will have to work fast to get you to look as smart as us." "Never mind that," replied Thomas. "I've something important to say. Do you realize it's a whole year since Mrs. Kindly saved us from a nasty accident? You remember when she was ill in bed and—" "Yes, of course," interrupted Edward. "You told us how she waved her red dressing gown out of her window to warn you about a landslide on the line ahead." "And you and Toby gave her presents," Percy joined in, "and the Fat Controller sent her to Bournemouth to get better." "But," said James and Henry together, "the rest of us have never really thanked her properly." "Exactly," said Thomas triumphantly. "So now I think we should all give her a special Christmas party." The big engines were delighted, and so were their drivers and firemen. "We'd like that," they said. "A party will be fun. We'll ask the Fat Controller." The drivers felt sure that the Fat Controller would agree, as indeed he did. "A party for Mrs. Kindly?" said the Fat Controller. "What a splendid idea, Thomas. Mrs. Kindly is a very good friend to us all." Everyone was looking forward to the party, and the engines were soon making plans. Then suddenly silence fell. The Fat Controller had bad news. "The weather's changed," he said. "Mrs. Kindly is all snowed up. Toby says he will help to rescue her. You must help too, Thomas. There's no party unless you do." Thomas hated snow, but he said bravely, "I'll try, sir. We must rescue her. We must." "There's a good engine," smiled the Fat Controller. "You and Toby will manage splendidly." The men came to fit Thomas with a snowplow. Thomas and Toby set off to the rescue. Thomas charged the snowdrifts fiercely. Sometimes he swept them aside, sometimes they stuck fast. When they stuck, Thomas and Toby drew back so that the men from the van could loosen the hard-packed snow. Then on they went again. It was hard and tiring work for everybody, but when they came to the cutting near the cottage, they could go no further. "Look at that!" exclaimed Thomas's fireman. "Beep, beep, beep! Here we are," whistled Thomas. The snow was so deep round the house that the answering wave had to come from an upstairs window. "Toot, toot, toot! So are we," came a voice from behind the cottage. "That's Terence," said Thomas excitedly. "He's come to help too." Sure enough, Terence had a snowplow and was working hard to clear a path to the railway line and safety. At long last, the rescue was complete. Percy arrived to take the tired workmen home. Terence said goodbye to Mrs. Kindly and promised to take care of her cottage as he watched them all set off. The engines made good time. No more snow had fallen, but the yard was dark when they arrived at Tidmouth. The shed doors were shut. There was silence, and there was no one to be seen. Thomas's heart sank. Then suddenly all the lights went on. What a marvelous sight awaited Mrs. Kindly. "Well done," said the fat controller, smiling happily. "I'm really proud of you all." Mrs. Kindly especially thanked the smaller engines. "Thomas and Toby are old friends," she said, "and now, Percy, you are my friend too." Percy was so pleased that he bubbled over. "3 cheers for Mrs. Kindly," he cried. "Beep, beep, beep," they all whistled. The fat controller held his ears, but everyone else laughed and joined in. "Right, everyone," he said. 1, 2, 3. Happy Christmas, Mrs. Kindly." All the engines whistled and everyone began to sing. "We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." Thomas the tank engine and his friends thought it was the best Christmas ever, and Mrs. Kindly could think of nowhere she would rather live than here with them on the island of Sodor. Every Christmas, there is a carol concert on the island of Sodor. The town band plays, and lots of people come to sing carols round the Christmas tree. Afterwards, there is always a special treat for the children, and this year, the fat controller wants the party to be an extra special celebration. Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree. It was 2 days before the carol concert. The fat controller was very busy, given orders for everywhere to be scrubbed and polished, ready for the special night. The engines were all very excited. They had been helping with the preparations, and now Henry, Gordon, and Thomas were waiting at the station for the fat controller to give them their final orders. "You all have jobs to do," said the fat controller. "Henry," he said importantly, "you are in charge of the cards, letters, and parcels. Gordon, you will bring the mayor." The fat controller paused impressively. "And Thomas, you will have the most important job. I want you to fetch the Christmas tree. Duck will look after Annie and Clarabelle until you get back." Thomas beamed with pride. "Yes, sir," he said. "Will we be able to sing the carols too?" "We'll see," promised the fat controller. That night, the other engines sulked in their shed. "Why should Thomas go?" grumbled Henry. "He can't do anything a splendid green engine like me couldn't do." "Nor me," agreed Gordon. "Anyone would think he was special or something." But Thomas didn't care what they said. He had been picked for the most important job. "You're only jealous," he said, and he shut his eyes and went to sleep. Next morning, Thomas set off to fetch the Christmas tree. It would be nice to sing carols again, he sighed, as he puffed along on his important mission. Thomas had to go down the line through Edward Station to pick up the tree. The fat controller had said that Thomas had to be back by tea time. Thomas picked up the tree safely and set off on the return journey. "I mustn't be late," he thought. "The fat controller is relying on me." But it had been snowing again. Large snowdrifts lay ahead, and Thomas was not wearing his snowplow. He whistled bravely and tried to make his way through. He ran into a snowdrift and tried to turn his wheels, but it was no good. He was stuck. Suddenly, the wind blew the snow all over him. Thomas was snowed under. Back at the station, it had been snowing too. The workmen rushed off to fetch their shovels to clear a path for the visitors. The other engines waited for Thomas to come back. They waited and waited. "Perhaps he's stuck in a tunnel somewhere," suggested Gordon. Henry let off steam indignantly. "Pooh!" he said. "He's much more likely to have been turned onto the branch line." "He could have run into a cow," suggested Donald. "Silence," said the Fat Controller. "We know that Thomas collected the tree safely, but now the snow has brought down the telephone wires. We must assume that Thomas is stranded somewhere near Edward Station." The engines all felt sorry for poor Thomas. "We're no going to leave him there, sir, are we?" asked Douglas. "Certainly not," said the Fat Controller. "I will need 2 volunteers to go and find Thomas." All the engines hooted at once. They all wanted to help to rescue Thomas. The twins, Donald and Douglas, were chosen for the job. Quickly, the men fetched the snowplows, and the driver and fireman checked each one to see that everything was ready for the journey. Soon, Donald and Douglas set off to the rescue, feeling cold but confident. "Good luck," the other engines whistled as the twins left the yard. At the junction, they met Toby, Percy, and Duck. "The Fat Controller has canceled all trains until Thomas is found," said Duck, "so take care." "Come back safely with Thomas and the missing Christmas tree," added Toby, giving a final blast on his whistle, just for luck. Donald and Douglas puffed bravely on, but the snow was getting thicker now. They struggled through Edward Station. Donald wanted to stop for a rest, but Douglas wouldn't let him. "What if Thomas is lying hurt somewhere?" he said. Great snowdrifts lay across Gordon's Hill. Again and again, Donald and Douglas forced the snowplows into the deep snow, and each time they managed to move slowly forward. Then they drew back and paused for breath. "What's that?" hissed Douglas. "I can hear something." Very faintly, there came a muffled cry. "Help! Help!" "Probably the wind," insisted Donald. "No, listen," said Douglas. "Help! Over here!" "Och, it's Thomas!" they cried together. "Come on," said Douglas. "Let's get him out. He must be frozen to his frames in there." The men began to dig the snow away. Thomas's driver and fireman, who had taken shelter at a nearby cottage, came out to help too. It was not long before they had dug Thomas and the missing Christmas tree out of the snow. Thomas was pleased to see the twins, but he was feeling cold and miserable. The men coupled him up behind Donald and Douglas, and they all set off on their journey home. When the engines arrived at the station, everyone gave Thomas such a warm welcome that he began to feel quite cheerful again. The Christmas tree was quickly unloaded, put into its tub, and decorated for the carol concert. There was a great rush to get the station ready, and by the time the mayor and visitors came crowding in, everything looked splendid. The Fat Controller stood in front of the engines. "As a reward for all your hard work today," he said, smiling, "you may go and enjoy the carols. Be quick now." "Yes, sir," said all the engines. "Wheesh!" said James, letting off steam because he was so pleased. The Fat Controller paused. "Kindly remember that this is a special occasion. Be on your best behavior, and I want no, wheeshing, please." The engines took their places at the carol concert. "1, 2, 3, boomed the Fat Controller, and suddenly, as if by magic, the station was flooded with light, and there was the Christmas tree, decorated with colored lamps, stars, and lights. Then the Fat Controller shouted, "3 cheers for Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends," and everyone clapped and cheered. The engines were delighted. James was so excited that he let out a great wheesh. Everyone laughed, and this time not even the Fat Controller seemed to mind very much. Suddenly there was a strange whirring noise. It seemed to come from the sky, and there, with his landing lights shining brightly, was Harold the helicopter. He came down gently in the snow, and out stepped a figure wearing a red cloak. Everyone cheered. It was Father Christmas. He handed out presents to all the children and thanked the engines for rescuing Thomas and saving the missing Christmas tree. "Ho, ho, ho! Happy Christmas, Thomas, and to all your friends," he said. The carol party was a great success. Afterwards, Thomas and Percy went back to the shed together. "It's no fun getting stuck in the snow," whispered Thomas to Percy, "but it was worth it for the party. Happy Christmas, Percy. Happy Christmas, everyone."